Let's detach ourselves from reality for a moment. The landscape outside the window is absolutely mesmerizing. So the visibility is excellent, and for the 1960s the car runs remarkably well. Again, considering it's from the 60s. Of course, I certainly understand the reasons why the Niva emerged victorious in the competition. But a unique vehicle such as this one was definitely needed too. It would have been positioned right between the Kozlik and the Niva. But alas, history simply does not deal in hypothetical what-ifs. I won't be able to test it off-road, which is perfectly understandable given that it's such a unique exhibit. But according to the tester's original recollections, even with a relatively underpowered engine, the Moskvich managed to keep pace with the benchmark Willys and the 69 Chishi. However, on the open road, on the asphalt, honestly, the Moskvich is significantly more engaging and interesting than the same Kozlik. If you didn't know who created and built this car, you'd definitely think it's a foreign make. So here's another gem from the Automobile Museum in the city of Verkhnaya Pishma. However, to be perfectly honest with you, we actually have 12,000 gems here. We're used to thinking that the first post-war off-roader for rural areas was the Gaz 69. But the first comfortable all-wheel drive car for the public was the Niva 2121. But it's not that simple. Production of the Gaz 69 began in 1952, and seeing the potential of the model at the flagship enterprise of the Soviet Union, namely the Moscow Small Car Factory, they decided that they too needed to create a car with a 4x4 wheel configuration. But they decided to go their own way, the way of unification, that is, to build an off-road vehicle or Jeep. That's exactly how all-wheel drive vehicles were called in the press back then, just like today. So the idea was to build it using parts and assemblies already being produced for the Moskvich cars. It was the mid-1950s. There were still more than 15 years to go before the birth of the Niva. The project was spearheaded by Igor Alexandrovich Gladilin, and he fully recognized the fact that the car needed to be structurally different from its international competitors at the time, but the final appearance ended up looking far too much like the Willys. Well, it's hard to blame anyone for that. We considered the Willys our own car. The Great Patriotic War brought Soviet soldiers closer to the American vehicle. And the resemblance isn't just external, there are a number of technical solutions in common as well, although the frame was different from both the Willys and the Gaz 69. The side members were made box-shaped from thin-walled metal connected by cross members. The body itself, made from stamped panels, was welded separately and mounted onto the frame using rubber cushions. The designers were creating a universal platform for both the army and the countryside. So, the manufacturability is evident in the body panels. These stampings reinforce the structure. There's a recess for the fuel tank. There are two of them here. On the other side, there's an identical filler neck. But the era of marketers and simplified exteriors had not yet arrived, so the lines are smooth. There is an elegance to the car's appearance. At the front, there's a cartoonish radiator grille with headlights from a gas vehicle set on small elevations, rather than being recessed into it, as they will be on the Moskvich 2150. They also decided to install a full-fledged metal roof with proper windows and opening vents on the new prototype. The fact that the designers were thinking about civilians, not the military, is evident because the rear door is an actual door, not a tailgate. By the way, the spare tire was deliberately mounted on the side so they wouldn't have to reinforce the hinges and so the door wouldn't sag. The rear compartment, while some early prototypes had a bench seat in the middle, here they've gone back to side-facing benches. By the way, there's even a handle to make getting in much easier, though it doesn't provide much help at all. And you can open the door from inside the cabin, which means it's a door, not a trunk lid. And the benches can be lifted up and locked in place. You can load as much as you want. It's just not very comfortable to sit here if you're tall. Well, that's to be expected. It's a prototype. The chassis of the 416 Moskvich comes from the previous Moskvich 410. Why invent something new if there was no alternative? And the front and rear axles, to put it simply, are split type. The axles use fully floating half shafts just like on powerful off-road vehicles and trucks. Although the key word here is like. They were a bit too weak. All the axles, of course, are leaf-sprung. To lower the body height and the center of gravity, but not the ground clearance, the axles are located above the springs and not below, as in the Gazik. At the front, in the steering knuckles, there are tricky CV joints of the system. Pendix Weiss. These constant velocity joints operate depending on the direction of motion of different sets of balls. Forward with one pair and in reverse with another pair. Today, this kind of design is rarely ever seen anymore in modern cars. The suspension also already uses fully functional double-acting shock absorbers, not lever-type ones. Additionally, it features a front anti-roll bar. There are limiting rubber pads so that the glass doesn't get hit and the paint doesn't get scratched. There's still a problem with engine power here. It's from the 407, later there will be ones from the 408 and even the 412, but for now it's just 45 horsepower. The horses come out at 4,500 revolutions per minute. Maximum torque is 88 Newton meters at 2,600 revolutions per minute. As you might have guessed, it's an inline 4-cylinder engine with a displacement of 1,360 cubic centimeters. I won't say anything about it, but as Yegor Yegorovich says, if you maintain it properly, it's excellent. I believe it. Take note, the ignition coil is mounted high up, just like in the gray Lyuka. And look at the air filter. A real snorkel. The fenders are removable. That's practical. Very. Before you get inside, notice that the doors don't go all the way down to the floor. This raises the waterline, and also, the window frames are not removable. Once again, here the primary focus is already on maximum comfort and ease. Naturally, the interior itself is austere, because for a true off-roader, practicality comes first. That is, the ability to wash the entire interior with a bucket of water. But even so, the designers tried to create a beautiful interior. The instruments are from the Moskvich 402 to 407, but on their own custom panel. Getting in is a bit tricky. The door opening is narrow and you have to lift your leg up high. Oh wow, look at that painted metal finish. It really is cool. By the way, these seats are fully adjustable so you can easily adjust your seating to keep you comfortable while you drive. It's still more than 15 years before the Niva was born. And what do you think of the two-tone doors? The lower part is covered with leatherette. Kozlik, the score is 0-2. If we take a look inside, you will notice that the entire ceiling is beautifully upholstered. Additionally, it comes equipped with dual sun visors for your comfort, as well as a pair of fully functional electric windshield wipers for clear visibility. Heater. You can direct it to your feet or to the windshield if you want. Natural draft ventilation systems. Switching between the left and right tanks. Because the tanks are located directly under me, there's a niche for all sorts of useless stuff. Take a look at these classic vent windows. They open smoothly to both the left and the right, which you really have to admit is extremely convenient for airflow. They even come equipped with a sturdy locking mechanism. This is quite unlike the simpler designs found on some domestic cars from that same era that we see today. The car accelerates with some difficulty, even though it doesn't weigh much. The curb weight is 1,158 kilograms. The two axles don't help with coasting, and the first gear is a bit too short. On second and third gear, things get livelier, but also much noisier. The toothed gears start to sing along with the mechanics, and the transfer case also has its own voice while driving. Everything hums, howls, a lot of noise. In short, it works. The gearbox is an old 4-speed unit, but the transfer case from the 410 is rigidly attached to the gearbox. That's the most significant difference here. No joint, which means fewer vibrations. But there are still vibrations. I can feel them. I want to drive. I haven't had the chance to check the fuel consumption of 10 liters per 100 kilometers. Nor have I tested the maximum top speed of about 100, but the faster I go, the more the car starts to sway and wander on the road. During factory tests, minor childhood issues would come up, which were fixed on the spot. At first, the military were very skeptical about the all-wheel drive Moskvich in general and about the car's creators in particular. They were just far too civilian and far too removed from the realities of military life. There was a funny incident during the test in Bronici. The engineers arrived without a first aid kit, without a fire extinguisher, and without any tools. The military asked, "All right, you forgot, but if you had brought them, where would you put everything?" But there turned out to be no space in the car for any of it. Still, the car passed every single test. The design documentation was ready. Even the military said that the car would be suitable for commanders. But then the interdepartmental back and forth began. There wasn't enough money to start production. The decisive point in the dispute and the fate of the all-wheel drive Moskvich was set by a competition. Competing were the Moskvich 2150, a further evolution of the 416, the Izhevsk 14, and the Niva Vaz 2121. We all know who won? But in reality, it was short-sightedness and bias that won. Both the country's leadership and the management of the enterprises were to blame, and Moskvich is not the only example of this. But the prototypes survived, and I'm showing them to you. Which means the hunt continues.